Okay, it is a couple of minutes after 6 o'clock, so we are going to go ahead and get started. Thanks for joining us for the Land Stewardship Series. This webinar series will cover a variety of topics related to stewardship and management of natural resources on your land. We typically offer this series as in-person workshops. With webinars, we won't be able to dive as deep as we would into these topics. So the idea is that you'll have the chance to hear from local experts on the basics of each topic and find out where to follow up for more information and resources. So my name is Samantha Tappenbeck. I am the Conservation Program Manager at the Flathead Conservation District. I am also joined by two of my fellow staff. Haley Graff is the Resource Conservationist, and Fiona Handler is an AmeriCorps member. She is a member serving with the Big Sky Watershed Corps. And we are excited to be here with you tonight. I'm going to cover a few housekeeping items. So by default, your video is off and your microphone is off. If you have any connectivity issues during the webinar, try exiting out and rejoining, but be sure to click that same link that you used to join the meeting to begin with. As we go through the presentation, we may mention resources or websites and links, and we'll post those in the chat for you, and then we'll also post it once we post the recording of the webinar. So this webinar is being recorded, and we will upload that recording to the Flathead Conservation District YouTube channel and website and make that available to you to watch anytime. So the webinar today will consist of a presentation for about 45 minutes, and then we will have a question and answer session after the presentation, and we'll shoot for about 15 minutes with that. If you have a question during the presentation, please type it into the Q&A box. So if you hover your mouse over the bottom of the screen, you'll see an option that says Q&A. It looks like a couple of chat boxes talking to each other. And so that's where you can enter questions. There's also a feature called the hand raise tool. So if you'd like to voice your question to everyone during the Q&A, you can hit that little raise hand feature, and we'll be able to see that you would like to ask a question and ask you to unmute yourself at that time. So at the end of the webinar, when you leave Zoom, you will be redirected to a survey, and we really encourage you to fill out that survey. So we want to hear from you so that, we can improve these kinds of events in the future. And it's also great for us to know what you learned, be able to track what participants learned so that we can, learn how to improve these events in the future and deliver the kind of information that you're interested in. So our land stewardship seminar topic tonight is soil health and composting. Alissa La Chance is our presenter this evening. She is the owner and operator of Dirt Rich Composting. And at this time, I will turn it over to Alissa. So thank you, Alissa. And I will stop sharing my screen and let you take over.
Okay. Hi, everybody. So Samantha, I guess I can go ahead and just begin sharing my screen right now. Okay, did that work for you? Good. All right. Welcome, everybody. I guess one positive thing about the pandemic is that maybe folks that wouldn't be able to make it to something like this, are away or something are able to make it to these kinds of presentations in larger numbers. And I want to say thank you to these ladies as well. And thank you for everybody for showing up for this. I think it's really exciting and pretty cool that there's this many people signed up for this and wanting to know more about how to take good care of their land. And I assume part of that is associated with wanting to take care of our the natural environment that we're all in every day and that our land butts up against. So yeah, thanks for being here and for being interested. So as Samantha already mentioned, I'm going to talk about kind of the basics of soil fertility and composting basics, and why composting even applies to soil fertility and how it applies, and kind of give y'all some different ideas about how you can maybe approach composting yourselves, or at least get some ideas going in your mind about how composting can be for you and how you can use it to the benefit of your land and managing it in a more holistic and just well-rounded manner that you can feel good about. All right. So again, my name's Alissa. I started Dirt Rich Compost in 2015. I have a background primarily in sustainable ag out of the University of Montana. And I found myself mostly interested in the soil more so than I was in actually growing plants. And the more that you learn about growing plants and managing land, the more that you learn that you're really managing soil. So that's what initially got me interested in soil, was my interest in growing food, and then realizing that wasn't quite it for me. And I finished my degree and got back home, came back to Whitefish, where I actually grew up. And the opportunity to start Dirt Rich Compost with a friend fell in my lap, really, serendipitously. And my partner at the time and I started composting for Xanterra, so all of Glacier National Park. And today we compost for over 100 different families in the Valley, and anywhere from 15 to 30 different businesses seasonally. And last year we weren't composting for Glacier National Park because most of it was shut down. But it looks like this year we'll be composting for them again. So last year we composted around 150 tons of material. And yeah, so that's how I got to know what I know about composting, and have done a lot of continuing education about soil ecology and soil biology in particular. That's waste reduction is a huge part of what I do, but soil is really my passion. Here's me dropping off my first load of dump truck load of compost to a seed farmer in the Flathead Valley, Robin with Good Seed Company. Maybe y'all have seen their seeds at Hooper's or wherever across the Flathead Valley. All right, so let's kind of touch into some soil fertility basics. I feel like there's probably a broad range of people. I don't know if there's people who are doing some ranching here and that are probably managing large tracts of land and also some smaller tracts of land. I feel like lots of the people that I've come across in that situation have primarily focused on managing the chemistry of their soil. And that's just what's been taught, is, how much nitrogen do you need to put onto your soil, how much phosphorus, and whatever other kind of basic nutrient content. And I would offer that that's a really a limited way to view how to manage soil. So what I'm going to be going into is basic biology of the soil and how taking care of the microbes and the biology in our soil will set you up so that you're having to do less management, spending less money, using less resources, and having a lighter footprint on the environment that your land is butted up against in your own land. All right. So obviously these are microscopic little beings here. At the top left corner, you're looking at a nematode. You're looking at some ciliates on the bottom right or bottom left corner, an amoeba, and kind of another cool photo on the bottom right of a nematode. So in our soil, we, just like above ground, we have a food chain of sorts. And just because we can't see it doesn't mean that it's not functioning at full force and providing really important, providing really important functions within the soil and making sure things are balanced within the soil and providing, you know, higher up kingdoms with whatever they need. Lots of scientists could argue that these microscopic organisms in our soil are really the base, the foundation of, you know, all of our different animal kingdoms all the way up to us. All right, so here's kind of how that basic hierarchy within the soil kingdom works. So what they have pictured here is a tree. I'm sure plenty of you have trees on your land, and that's something that maybe some of you are wanting to manage a little bit. But I also imagine that a lot of you are thinking more in terms of like lawns and large tracts of farmland of sorts. And it doesn't really matter exactly like what plants you're growing. There's always going to be bacteria and fungi that are at the base and the core foundational, they're the foundation of the soil food web that's going to support whatever plant or whatever tract of land you're trying to take care of. So after that, soil and fungi, if you look a little bit lower, are being fed on by springtails, nematodes, which you saw one there, and mites, which we all, you know, some mites are larger than others. We can see some with the naked eye and some we have to use a microscope. And lower down, there's things that we can see like ground beetles, millipedes, centipedes, and spiders, earthworms, all the creepy crawlies that, you know, kind of get a bad rap and people are grossed out by them. And they just don't get the credit that they deserve. So that hierarchy right there is part, you have to have all those different organisms within what's called the soil food web to make sure that there's nutrients properly cycling within your soil. And if you look at the base of the tree, there's an arrow pointing down to organic matter. And I know that that's probably something that these ladies have talked about and the conservation folks have talked about is a way to support your soil and take care of your soil is making sure that you have organic matter on it. And there's different reasons for that. You know, an open tract of land without any grass growing on it, without anything covering it at all is like an open wound for soil. So where else in our natural environment, in a healthy place, do we see open soil without anything growing on it? The only places that I can think of are places where there have been bulldozers, you know, any places that were ripping up tracts of land or where the soil has been degraded. So that's a huge signal for us, like something that we can take from nature to be like, okay, well, organic matter is important. Making sure that that soil is covered is important. another reason why organic matter is so important that not as many people talk about is because that's one of the primary sources of food for fungi and bacteria, which is the foundation of the soil food web. All right. What else do I want to say about that? Not yet. All right, so here's just kind of a cool other picture of like getting a sense of, it's not just farmland. This is kind of, you know, the system of living little biota that are in the soil, in the ground, that are thriving in their own little areas. So I wanted to include this photo because I want to touch on a little bit the idea that it's an old school idea that we need to be providing the plant what it needs with nitrogen, with phosphorus, and all of the chemistry that I kind of alluded to before. New science is showing it doesn't matter what plant, all living plants. New science is showing that plants are directly in contact through hormone exchange, telling the fungi and the bacteria that are hanging around the roots of these plants exactly what nutrients they need from the soil. So the fungi and the bacteria, why they're so foundational for the soil food web, is both of them help to unlock nutrients in the soil into a plant available form. So without them, you're gonna have to apply nitrogen, right? So literally the plant is communicating with, in particular with fungi, and you can actually see in this photo, there's like web-like growths on the roots of this plant. And that's to show that's actual mycelial growth on the roots of the plants. So they're in a symbiotic relationship in this photo. The fungi is helping to increase the surface area of those roots so they can reach out farther for the roots past where it's already grown to get it water. The plant is letting the fungi know exactly how much nutrients they need and what kind of nutrient. And in exchange, like, why is the fungi doing that for this plant? Like, what's the fungi getting out of it? So science is actually showing that it's something like in some cases around 70% of the energy that is taken in by the leaves of whatever plant or the stalk or whatever of the plant that you're growing is not actually being used by the plant, which is shocking and amazing and just magical, because it's really what's happening with a lot of that energy is it's going down into the roots of that plant and it's being distributed to the fungi or to the bacteria in the form of what's called exudates in scientific terms. So exudates are like cakes and cookies for bacteria and fungi. So you can see that the plant and the fungi and bacteria need each other. And they already have this system working perfectly. They've been doing it for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And without that fungi and bacteria there, our plants get sick. Our plants and our land get sick. We see more invasive species and weeds. We see, if you're growing crops, we see issues with mold. We see issues with blight, whatever it is, because they do not have that symbiotic relationship with that fungi and with the bacteria that are actually helping to boost their immune system and getting all the nutrients that they need in the quantities that they need. So just like a person, like a human, that plant's going to get sick and it's going to need outside support if we are killing off that symbiotic relationship. So I wanted to kind of give you a visual of, I guess, soil succession. So, you know, say a new housing complex is put in, which is pretty pertinent to now, as you know, we're all familiar with the growth that's happening right now. And there's a lot of driving and moving of soil and everything. And there's a lot of disturbance, essentially. What could have been trees at one point is now going to be, because of all the disturbance of that machinery, of that equipment, messing with the biology of the soil, it might be taking things from, you know, a small forest back to, if you trace back towards like lichen, mosses, and annual weeds. So what you're going to see in that kind of a situation is more invasive weeds, is more of the plants that are, oh, what do you call them? They're taking advantage of the situation. They're gonna grow, produce a lot of weeds, and then die really fast. And that's in order to build organic matter and move the soil succession along and try and get back to a forest setting. So where I imagine a lot of you are probably in the perennial weeds and grasses, maybe some shrubs in that stage of soil succession. How do I want to explain that? If you're in the annual weeds area and you're trying to get rid of those invasives and you're trying to, you know, keep your crops or keep your land or even just your lawn looking healthy, you want to move, you want to shift the biology towards what you would see in the ground of a perennial weed and grass area that's looking healthy. That's going to look like larger and more diverse populations of fungi, larger and more diverse populations of bacteria. And you can't forget all of the other microorganisms and macroorganisms that come with it that we looked at on that hierarchical sheet. So if you just have fungi and bacteria and you don't have ciliates, you don't have nematodes and all these other animals that are helping to support that living and breathing system, these plants are not going to get the nutrients that they need in order, and you're not going to be building the organic matter that you need in order to move soil succession further. So let's just talk a little bit about some of the things that can mess with soil biology. And I want to preface here that I'm not a purist. I don't think that there's any kind of a situation where herbicide is a tool. Tilling is a tool. Synthetic nitrogen and phosphorus or fertilizer of any kind, they're tools. I think that we've gotten to the place in our management of land where things have gotten so bad and we've deteriorated our soils so much that we have to use those tools way more than they should be used. And it's a bad cycle that just keeps reducing the quality of the soil and increasing the amount of herbicides that need to be used, increasing the amount of pesticides that need to be used because the soil is sick and therefore the plants are sick. So some things that throw off the biology and the ecology of the soil is herbicide. Using a lot of herbicide is incredibly detrimental, especially for fungi. And if you're using a lot of fungicides, well, it's to kill fungi. So there is a time and a place if you're trying to save a tomato crop and it's your livelihood and you need to spray fungicide to make that happen, yeah, you probably should. And then there should be incremental steps to try and get your soil to the place where you're not needing to do that anymore. So fungicide, herbicide, both detrimental to the soil biology. Compaction, so driving equipment excessively on soil. You can see that there's standing water right here. That's a bad sign. That means that if your soil biology is thriving, that water is going to be gone within a couple minutes because it's filtering through the soil and serving its purpose, and the soil is actually taking it in like a sponge. So if you're driving tractors on a lot, if you're driving trucks, trailers, whatever, that's going to be damaging, specifically fungi. This is kind of, obviously more of an application for gardens, but yeah, if you can see at the top left, tilling is going to, if you can imagine that thriving soil food web under there, and those little webs of fungi that are going from root to root and that are all within your soil and connected. If you are tilling, if you are doing any kind of tilling like that, you're destroying those webs, and it takes time for them to come back. I still till my soil on my garden soil on occasion. It's not, again, tilling is a tool, but it's something that's utilized far too often. So what's something that can support your soil food web? Some things that can support your soil food web, making sure that your soil has adequate amount of water. But it's an interesting cycle. Once you start to take care of the soil food web under the soil, you need to use less and less water, because it is, again, acting like a sponge, taking that water in and holding it appropriately. And you can see on the bottom left, mulching, or, in instances with large crops, making sure that you're leaving organic matter after you've harvested. And the bottom right is compost, which we're going to get into. Compost, my favorite thing. So you can see around the outside, everything looks really nasty in the beginning. And for us, over a period of, for our thermal compost, which we'll get into, it's over a period of anywhere from 3 to 5 months. It will look like the picture in the center. So a question that I get pretty consistently are people think that I have dirt to sell. And I guess I want to clarify the difference between soil and compost. Soil is a mixture of broken down minerals from rock and some organic matter and a healthy soil ecology. Compost is just straight organic matter. So it's anything that once was alive and is now dead. A good compost should have the entire soil food web encompassed within it and living and thriving within it. So just to give you guys the idea, I'm sure there's like a range of familiarity with composting, and forgive me if y'all are totally familiar with all of this, but I'll cover some of the basics. I'm sure you've heard of browns and greens, nitrogen and carbon. So nitrogen, in our situation, nitrogen is primarily food scraps. But nitrogen is anything that's colorful and is still alive. So you can see on the bottom left, there's some like kale that's dying, but it's still green, it's still colorful. There's some grass there that's still green. Poop is a form of nitrogen, fresh poop. So if you have cattle, if you have horses, but we can talk talk more about, I should just say now that if you're going to be using excrement in any of your compost from horses or from cattle, to be very, very, very careful about what the food source is for your animals. That's a huge issue for me at Dirt Rich Compost. I can't, there's so much herbicide being sprayed right now on especially 2,4-D on hay that animals are eating, and it's persisting through their gut. And then it ends up in their excrement. And if you're using that in your compost and you're growing anything that's a broadleaf, you're going to be really sad because it could kill all of your plants. So keep that in mind. And if you feel like any compost that you're going to be making, you're going to want to use on your garden, make sure that you're feeding your animals hay that's not sprayed. So again, back to the basics of nitrogen. It's anything that a good rule of thumb is anything that's colorful. Browns or carbon, anything that once was living and is now dead. So leaves, wood chips, old straw, again, be really careful where you get your straw. Brown paper bags, egg cartons, garden cutback that's been dead for a month, aged cow manure that's been around your lot for a year. It's still a really valuable resource, and it's mostly carbon at that point because it's been aged for so long. I'm not going to really have time to go into the ins and outs of like how to build your own compost piles and managing that compost pile. But what I really want to talk to you all about is the fact that there's different kinds of composts. And really the first thing that you should do when considering what kind of composting you want to do is what's the waste material on hand at your land? What do you have that you're like, what should I do with this? I don't know what to do with this. Is it a bunch of lawn clippings? Is it, leaves that I sadly see everybody put into plastic bags and throw into the garbage, into the landfill every year when they could be put back into the carbon cycle? Lots of manure around here. Lots of people calling me and asking me what to do with their manure. So considering how much time you have on hand, what equipment you have on hand, your level of interest, like, do I actually want to be spending that much time on this, and what materials you have to work with. So the different types of composting that I'm going to be talking about are thermal, or what's known as hot composting, static, what's known as cold composting, and vermicomposting. So that's composting using worms. Okay, so thermal composting is what Dirt Rich has done primarily for the last 5 years. There's, smaller examples of what a thermal composting pile could look like here. Things that you're going to want to have if you're going to be thermal, like, who are the people that would want to be thermal composting? I guess people whose yards are protected from bears. That's a really big one in the valley. Like, it's people that want to be composting their food waste. And if you want to be doing that, we want to be sure that we're not going to become an attractant to carnivores. It's people that want to be getting a product out faster. So you will have a hot composting pile be finished, depending on what you have in there and how hot it's getting, within a couple months, maybe less. But thermal composting involves more attention. It's great to have a thermometer. you're going to be flipping and turning it. So you're going to need to be putting more time and energy into it, but you're going to get product quicker. So, okay. I'm going to show you a video of what it looks like when we do our thermal composting. It can be done in a million different ways, and this is a larger scale example of how it's done. So if y'all have tractors, you could build a lot of really great compost. So you can see the lower bed, what we call it the lower line, we build windrows. There's wood chips, there's leaves in there, all those browns, those green bags that I'm opening up right now. Those in particular were actually containers from compostable containers from the Whitefish Farmers Market. And you'll see me bringing food here in a second. So with any composting that you're doing, I would say that it's pretty accurate to assume that there is a connecting thread of how you build it, which is layering. So what I'm doing right now is layering those browns and different materials in.
Hey, Alyssa,
Yeah.
we are actually not seeing the video.
Oh,
We still see the how Dirt Rich does thermal screen.
okay, hold on.
You hit
New share.
yes, new share. You should be able to choose either your desktop with that video. There we go. We see it.
Perfect. Thank you. So, yeah. It can be kind of a gross process initially, especially if you're working with food waste. But if you are doing it properly, you know, the first couple rounds of a turn or two, it's going to be kind of stinky. I don't care what people say if you're doing it right or wrong. Like it should not be something that you smell from across your yard. But you're right, you'll smell that there's food in there. But within, you know, a week or two, with one or two turns of that material, it should be breaking down to the point where it's looking more like soil than anything else. So you can see that I'm layering. We come in and we will dump, you know, 1,300 gallons of food scraps and layer it in with the carbon. So you can see that that's probably meat from Costco. You can compost meat. That's another great thing about thermal composting. If you have material like meat or food waste that's, you know, it's a human pathogen issue and you need to get that material really hot, thermal composting is a great method to use. Another thing that thermal composting is really good for is killing seeds. So if you have a lot of non-natives or, you know, invasive species on your property and you're hand pulling or whatever you're doing and you want to kill those seeds, and that's your primary goal, you can do that with thermal composting, but you're going to want to be sure that you have a thermometer and you're regulating and getting that mix right so that it's getting hot enough. And hot enough is about 130 degrees for several days. Okay. Another option is called static or cold composting. This is a really great option for folks who, you know, maybe have larger tracts of land and material, like you see that big pile of, I guess, what looks like grass, and they just don't know what to do with it. If you manage it properly, it can become a valuable resource that you could be applying back onto your fields. So, you know, the name is an obvious descriptor for it. It's generally, these piles are made of more carbon than nitrogen. Nitrogen is the heating ingredient for your piles. So generally static or cold composting is primarily more browns or more things that have been sitting around your land for longer periods of time, that you need to do something with it. So it's kind of known as like the pile it up and check on it in a year and a half kind of composting. This is a great way to create a happy environment for fungi. So static composting is really can be a beautiful way to cultivate a huge variety of healthy numbers of fungi, which is generally what is most in need of reintroduction in farm and field soils. So the last one that I want to talk about is called vermicomposting. It's worm composting. You can do it on a lot of different scales. It's a great solution if you're a person that has limited space and you want to compost your food waste, but you also don't want to become an attractant for bears. You can keep bins inside your home in the basement where you don't have to do any turning. The worms are processing that material for you. One of the challenges of vermicomposting is if you don't do it inside, you are going to, worms don't like to be cold. They will freeze and die over the winter if you haven't built your pile in such a way that they are protected from the cold. But the great thing about worms is even if they die, if your worm pile outside is really healthy and thriving, there's going to be a lot of little yellow worm eggs in it, and they can survive much colder temperatures than the actual worms can. So the following season, say you lost your population of worms because you didn't insulate it, your pile as well as you should have, there's going to be some eggs in there that will repopulate the pile, which is awesome. Dirt Rich is starting to get really into vermicomposting because we want to start talking to folks about making what's called compost teas and compost extracts. So if you're working with a large plot of land, say, hundreds of acres, even like anywhere from 5 acres to hundreds of acres, it can get really expensive and challenging to apply compost in the amounts that you need on that large of a tract of land. So the compost, if I didn't make this clear enough, and I feel like I didn't, and my apologies, compost is great to get organic matter back onto the soil. It's also providing plant available nutrients, but primarily if you have good compost, it's getting all of the microbes that are missing in your soil back into the soil. So if you're applying a high quality compost, you should be getting those nematodes back into your diminished soil. You should be getting that fungi from the compost and inoculating it back into your soil. And a really great way to do that in a less costly and easier way to apply those organisms is by making teas and extracts. So vermicompost is a really just unbelievably beautiful product. It's a really concentrated and just so microbially diverse kind of compost in the end that if you wanted to make an extract out of it, it can be, high tech, or it can be really simple. So you could have a, 60-gallon bin or something, and as much as a cubic foot of worm compost, really, and you want a high quality worm compost. and you literally treat it like a tea bag that you're putting into that non-chlorinated water, massaging it, and you're literally releasing the microbes that are in that compost into your water. And then what can you do with that water? You can spray it on your land. So that helps to inoculate soils with those microbes that were in the compost in a much simpler and more graceful and less energy intensive way. So that's why I love vermicomposting right now, is it can be used on larger tracts of land and getting these microbes out in the form of water. Let's see. Yeah. So it's kind of an abrupt end. I'm mostly, I mean, I could keep talking about this kind of stuff forever, but I'm really interested in what some of people's questions might be around this stuff. And I'm interested to hear what they are needing as far as resources and what their specific situations are. A great resource to check out online is earthfort.com. They are a lab that tests for biology and they test for chemistry as well, but they're amazing. I've worked with them a lot, and they actually have online courses as well, going way more into depth than I went into all of this, that are, they're run really well. And Matt, who runs the whole business, is so knowledgeable. Another great thing to check out is soilfoodweb.com with Elaine Ingham. I don't agree with everything that either of these people have put out, but they have a lot of really great information out there for people to get a better grasp of what I kind of discussed. Some books to check out are Grow Your Soil. So harness the power of the soil food web to create your best garden ever. It doesn't have to be garden. It could be your best crop ever. It doesn't matter. It's just giving you the basics of compost and how it can be applied to improve your soil. If you want to get more into the science and like the nitty-gritty biological aspects of soil ecology, teaming with nutrients, teaming with fungi, teaming with microbes by Wayne Lewis and Jeff Lowenfels is great. This is something that I'm just gonna put out there because I'm not saying that I think that Fred Pierce knows exactly what he's talking about, but I will be interested to see if there's a transition and discussion over the next 10 years of how to deal with invasive species. Just given the fact that herbicide is actually making the soil, environmental and ecological conditions of the soil such that it encourages more invasive species to grow. And it's more of a Band-Aid solution than a holistic solution. I'll be curious to see what discussions come up over the next 10 years about how to deal with invasives differently. And so the new wild is going into that discussion a little bit. It's very controversial, but I think it's interesting information to consider. All right. I think that's pretty much what I have for you guys.
Alissa, thank you so much for all of that really great information. I would like to go ahead and open it up for questions. We've gotten a few that have come through in the Q&A so far. So I think you answered this first one a little bit, but I'll go ahead and read the full question and give you a chance to answer. So this question is from Constanza. She is asking, is anyone doing assessments of soil health in the Flathead using a living soil assessment? Or is a chemical/nutrient assessment enough for at least giving us a snapshot of soil health, if not sustainable or long-term health?
That's kind of opening a Pandora's box into the world of soil testing. What I would suggest based off of my knowledge, which, you know, I'm not a consultant and there are people out there like Matt who know so much about this, but I would say it's important to get an idea of, you know, basic soil biology analysis. And if you like, Earth Board isn't paying me to talk about them. I just really believe in them and what they offer, and the information that they're providing to people. So I would probably start with getting, you know, a basic chemistry test as well as a basic biology test. And, you know, Matt will probably tell you that getting a basic chemistry test isn't actually going to tell you that much because it's not what's in plant available form. So there may be however many tons of nitrogen or however many whatever of phosphorus, but it doesn't mean that it's available to your plant. So that's why the biology aspect is so important, because you want to see if you have all the biology that's cycling those nutrients in the proper way to get it to your plants. Is there anyone doing it in the Flathead as far as actual testing goes? No, we don't have a biology lab or anything like that in the Flathead. Earth Fort is based out of Oregon, and that's who I would suggest checking out. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know there are several labs out there that are now starting to do biology tests, you know. I don't know exactly what like the, you know, format looks like once you get your test results back, but I would hope there would be not only just like a list of what you have, but also some kind of explanation as to why or why not it is significant to your soil health. I don't know if that is the case, and it might vary from lab to lab, but I do recommend, if you decide to go that route, definitely consult a professional once you get the results and talk through what your results mean for you and your soil.
Yeah, absolutely, Samantha. And that's what's so one of the, I don't know if things have changed, but Matt used to offer free consultations to go over what your results mean. And they've had really great videos to explain that as well.
Yeah. All right, so we actually have a hand raised, and Melissa Wood, I think, has her hand raised and would like to ask a question. I'll go ahead and let you talk if you would like to ask your question to the group. Go ahead.
Sure. I actually wrote the question as well, but I'm an organic gardener from Florida and I'm moving to Flathead. We bought some property and are trying to start an orchard. And I've been told that approaches that I would use in Florida, like getting wood chips, for example, as mulch and having them break down to increase the fungal quantities in the soil, that doesn't work as well in the Flathead because it's so cold that people say you put down wood chips and they just last for years. I'm curious if you can just give me any information about how to build up your soil aside from just, you know, buying loads and loads of compost or spraying compost tea. But how does the cold weather affect composting in the Flathead?
Well, I would say that cold weather affects composting is kind of a different question than so cold weather, what scientists are actually finding that fungi are most active underneath the snow when it's cold, which is crazy and amazing. So they are fungi is very active even during the cold winter months. So do wood chips take longer to break down than in Florida where it's hot and humid? Probably. But do I think that's problematic? I wouldn't see that as problematic or something that's like an issue that needs to be solved. The fact that you know that trees and perennials need more fungal presence than bacterial presence speaks a lot to your knowledge as far as farming and gardening goes. And so maybe just adding, you know, less wood chips, or another thing that I would suggest too is, getting a huge pile of wood chips that you let age for a couple years and then applying it and putting it onto your trees. So it's already started the breakdown process, if that makes sense. Did I answer your question, or is there another aspect to that you feel like I'm not getting to?
That was a great answer. And I didn't know about the fungi being more active under the snow. So I'm delighted that you told me that. I guess my next question would be, where do you find good like ramial wood chips that you can make a pile of and have break down for a few years? How do you source that in the valley if you don't have, large acreage?
Right. I would talk to the city of wherever you're living. Generally, hardwoods are the chips that you want to go for. And that's a lot of our wood chips are from arborists around the valley, or, the city of Columbia Falls, or the city of Whitefish, because all of these valuable things that are resources are looked upon as kind of waste, or something that a lot of entities don't know what to do with. So if you give those people a call, an arborist of your choice, or whatever city I don't know which department you would call, but just asking them about, I know the city of Whitefish has been contacting me and some other people and wondering what they should do with wood chips. So I know that you can show up there and grab a truck bed full.
Can you
I'll also
can you-
jump in and say that Flathead Electric has a program where you can get some data come through, and they do the trimming of trees next to power lines. They wood chip all that, and it's not really a first come first serve program. It's like a how close you are to wherever they're working type program. They'll give you a call and say, hey, do you want a free dump truck load of wood chips? So that's a good one to look into.
Awesome.
All right, so we had an interesting comment come through that you need to watch you don't create fires during thermal composting. So Alissa, in your experience and expertise, will your thermo compost pile catch on fire if you're not careful?
If you're getting your compost pile up to like 180 degrees, which, yeah, it can combust for sure. Whoever said that is right. Like, there have been large composting operations where they weren't managing things properly and it just lit on fire. So I guess that's something to consider when we're in a dry and hot place in the summertime, but you'd really have to have a pretty huge pile going of a mixture that's really hot to get it up to 180. Yeah.
Definitely worth investing in a thermometer to keep track of that kind of thing.
Yes.
So a question came through from Jennifer. She said, this is all great info for smaller gardeners in wet regions. We live in the relatively arid West and have a considerable space we'd like to restore with better soil care. I feel like we need a feedlot to come dump a year's worth of manure all over the property to make a dent in beginning the rehab. How do you recommend people without ample water compost? Is there a specific method you might recommend?
Yeah, I think in that particular situation, I mean, this is another thing that if you're somebody that's got larger tracts of land and have, really big plans to try and rehab it and get it to a certain place, I would send you to a consultant that and a lab that has that can look at your specific scenario and your specific soil biology and give you some insight as to how to do that with your specific situation. But based off of what I'm hearing, firstly, I would never recommend having somebody haul a ton of manure to you. I think that's really, it can be a really easy way to, I would recommend that in specific instances, if you know exactly what those animals have been fed, and if you've aged that material for at least a year. So what's happening, you don't want to spread that manure on your fields just fresh, because there's a ton of salt in that. And it's not going to be a beneficial thing to be spreading on your land if it's not aged properly. But it is going to definitely contribute to getting some good organic matter out there. And another thing to consider, just, you know, is that if you have one kind of material, like just manure compost, versus having a compost with a variety of inputs in there, you're going to be getting a relatively limited set of organisms out onto that land. So if you've just got horse manure from one paddock, or, you know, one arena or something, you can bet that that's going to be a very specific population of microbes. And the more diversity you can get in your soil, the better. Another thing that I would say is that I would be looking at vermicompost if I were you. And yes, I probably wouldn't recommend doing a really large compost pile to you, because you do want to have a lot of water involved in the composting process. And if that's really a hindrance and like a limiting factor for you, I would consider either finding a supplier that has really great worm compost, or starting to make your own in small quantities, like inside or in larger quantities outside. I'm not sure exactly where you're at. And learning, there's so many videos out there. I would suggest trying to make teas and extracts, but being really careful where you learn about how to make teas and extracts. Look through somebody like Earthfort, who's going to teach you how to do it the right way, or, you know, keep it really simple with an extract like I talked about, where you are dipping that material into water, massaging it for a certain period of time, like up to 5 minutes, and then spraying it on that land. Because what that's going to help do is to inoculate that soil with the microbes that you need to actually get better water retention in the long run. But talk to a lab too. Yeah.
So I think that that's a really great question and is really relevant for a lot of the people that we have around here. And I hope that folks are able to continue watching as weeks go on, because compost is one really great tool that we have for improving soil. But there's some other practices that we're going to be chatting about in later weeks, such as cover crop use and pasture management and things like that, where you can really take larger areas of your land and start to get back to some of the natural practices and sort of set your soil up and your land up on the correct trajectory, so it starts to do some of these things on its own. And for people who have larger tracts of land and maybe don't have irrigation infrastructure or things like that, some of those easier, more scalable options might be something worth looking into.
Haley, thank you for mentioning that, especially the cover crop stuff, because another way to feed those microbes is by having plants growing out there. So yeah, that's a great suggestion for the cover crops. Yeah.
Another point that kind of gets at one of the questions that came in that is loosely about whether or not invasive species are beneficial to soil health. I think that answer depends on what you have. But, you know, one of the tenets of soil health is maximizing plant diversity. And what invasive plants do is, you know, they're excellent competitors, and they tend to reduce species diversity. And you see that trickle down effect all the way into the soil food web. So the short answer, I think, is it depends, but could be. I think, Alissa, you provided some information about how the science is still new on this, and there's some resources we could explore to help answer that question.
Yeah.
All right. So how often do you turn your basic household compost pile?
It depends on the mix that you have, the percentage of greens and browns, so nitrogen and carbon. A good rule of thumb is somewhere around 30. If you want your pile to get hot and it's smaller, anywhere from 30 to 40% like food scrap or nitrogen, like grass clippings, and 60 or 70% leaves or browns. And I would say you're probably going to turn that thing like 3 or 4 times before the temperature starts to drop. And that's going to be over a period, like drop to ambient temperature. And that's going to be over a period, I would guess, depending on the size of your pile and your mix, of about maybe a month and a half.
Okay, a question from Tim came in. You mentioned how many people bag their leaves. How can you get a community to change this mindset and begin to compost? I'm not sure if you'll have an ultimate answer for that question, but any thoughts you might have on it would be great.
I mean, it depends on if you're talking about as an individual, or as a business or as an entity of some kind. But how can we stop? I think education and what you ladies are doing and talking to people about what leaves are and what organic matter is and what it does for the cycles of our soil is really important, because a lot of people don't even, that's just what's done. Leaves are bagged and then, you know, your lawn looks clean and perfect. And the more that people, I think there's a lot of reorienting our culture around like what beauty is. And I mean, we could go on and on about this kind of topic. I think what I would suggest is being leading by example, you know, and if people ask you what you're doing with your leaves, or if you see somebody that's a friend that you feel like is receptive to you chatting with them about it, be like, you know, it's just one person at a time. Like, do you know that you could compost that? Just like throw your leaves in the backyard in the corner where nobody's looking and let it break down for a couple of years and put it on your houseplants or something, you know? I'm definitely a proponent of education and inspiration rather than shaming people into making change. It's a tough question, my friend. I'm not, we're all trying to figure it out still. But yeah, I would say like leading by example is a big one.
I think on the heels of education comes, you know, I guess incentives for doing things. You know, people like to get something for their investment.
Mm.
So if you take the time to educate yourself about composting, I think what you'll find is that it is a pretty low investment for a very large return. And so once you get that, you know, basic education and some of the tools that you need to start composting, let the microbes do the work for you. And so if you can, you know, spread that word and experiment yourself, find out what works for you, and you know, be able to get that message out there, it's probably a, you know, sort of a ripple effect, I think, for individual communities.
Agreed.
All right, so we have several questions in the chat and we won't be able to get to all of them. Let me see if I can pull out, I'll do 2 more questions and then we will call it for this evening, and we will try to post as many resources for follow-up as possible. All right, let's see. So Abby asks if you have any recommendations on where to start for small scale at-home vermicomposting. And she said this presentation was great, and thanks to everyone for putting it on.
Awesome. There's a lot of different ways to do small scale at-home vermicomposting. I would direct you to YouTube. There's so many different ways to do it, and everybody's going to say something a little bit different. But another thing that I would suggest, check out some YouTube videos, check out and come up with what you think is going to be the best option for you, and then be willing to mess it up and, you know, troubleshoot and try again and see what exactly you did wrong. If you can Google and YouTube pretty much anything and find the answer at this point. And if y'all are interested in like more hands-on classes and stuff like that, shoot me an email in the future when things look a little bit different. I'm hoping to be doing more courses on that kind of a thing.
All right, I think a good question to end on is from Allie, and she asks, does Dirt Rich take leaves if folks want to drop them off, maybe if they don't have room to compost themselves on their land?
Yes. So we are at, if you go to our website and you scroll down to the bottom, there's a map of how to get to our site. Don't enter it into Google Maps, because it's going to take you to the wrong spot. And we accept leaves, we accept garden cutback, we accept wood chips, we accept manure. Yeah, I think that's mostly it. So yep, if you're like, I want to do something good with these leaves and recycle them, we will absolutely take them at our site.
Great. All right.
And
Oh yeah, go ahead.
sorry to interrupt, Samantha. And if anybody has any particular questions, I know these ladies are going to share some really awesome resources with everybody. And I'm hoping to be able to hop in on some more of these talks and courses, because it sounds like there's some really great stuff coming up. But just shoot me an email if there's any specific questions that you have for me around compost that I'm happy to try and answer for you. And that's dirtrichcompost@gmail.com.
Hey, Alyssa, one of the questions or comments that we had pretty early on was somebody wondering about some of the primary literature and for those facts and statistics that you were throwing out.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we'll probably work with you as well, see if we can get some of those things and post those as additional resource once the video gets added to our YouTube channel and the website.
Awesome. That sounds great.
All right. Well, Alyssa, thanks again so much for all the really great information. Just want to remind everyone to join in next week and for the rest of the webinar series. Next week on the 24th, we will be talking about wildlife conflict mitigation. So should be a hot topic and lots of interesting information. And just wanted to remind you to please take the survey. When you leave the meeting, you will be redirected to that automatically. It should just take a few minutes. If you have any questions about the seminar or would like to follow up, please reach out to our office. And be sure to tune in for the rest of the webinar series with the same link that you received when you registered. That'll take you to each event for the next 6 weeks. So thanks again for joining, and we'll see you next week.